and welcome to our sixth video of 2022 of Donkeys and Dragons, where we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so chatting about a specific topic. Today, we're going to talk about feedback, both giving and receiving. And so, hello, I'm Janet Gregory.
And I'm Lisa Crispin. We're authors of 3 books on Agile testing and founders of the Agile Testing Fellowship. So in our book, More Agile Testing, the second book we wrote together, we devoted a whole chapter to feedback. And then this has been a topic that's come up for us in recent months. And personally, I sometimes have trouble asking for feedback. I think it's for fear that it's going to be negative feedback because I've been kind of burned by that before. And so at Agile Testing Days USA, we had our lean coffee in the mornings, and I brought this up as a lean coffee topic, and we had a really interesting discussion.
It was a good discussion. And there's so many different kinds of feedback. There's formal feedback, where maybe your boss gives you a performance review. I shudder. Or you've asked somebody else to give you feedback on something specific. For example, when I was in Toastmasters for many years, there was somebody assigned to give specific feedback on your talk. Part of what I learned there was both learning to give feedback, but also to receive feedback. And there's ways to do that, and both are important. So Lisa, you mentioned that you had trouble asking for feedback, maybe that you were afraid of the negative feedback. I think that being able to give good feedback is important. And too often people don't do it very well. Sometimes it comes out sounding negative. So I think as a person, it's our job kind of thing to learn how to receive it, how to respond, whether it's negative or positive, because really that response is the only thing we can control. We can't stop other people from talking and maybe giving us that feedback.
Yeah, that is a really good point. We can only control our own reaction to it and how we decide to make use of it.
Yeah.
It's always felt good for me to get feedback when I'm collaborating with people on the teams I work on, and with customers as well. That feels good to get that kind of feedback. So, for example, if I've done a pairing session with somebody or an ensemble testing or programming session with multiple people, just taken 5 or 10 minutes at the end of that to have kind of a mini retro and say, hey, went well, what could we do better next time? And for me, it's because I'm always asking questions, I'll ask, did my questions feel like they were slowing you down, or did they lead to something useful? And so that really helps me know how I can contribute next time. But I just have a hard time asking people about, for feedback on my performance generally, or what have I contributed? What was valuable? Whether it's asking a client, because I feel kind of awkward. It's like, well, they paid me to do something. What if they think I was terrible? I just kind of don't want to know. Or asking friends who are testers that maybe I've helped them with something over the years.
Yep.
Asking them, what was the best thing I did for you? Like, how did I help you the most? So that I can continue to do that for other people. That seems like a really good thing to do. And I just have a hard time making myself do that.
Yeah, Lisa, I wish I had an easy answer for you. Courage to ask for feedback is hard. In fact, our last newsletter was all about courage. It's easy to assume, I think, that everything is going really, really well unless otherwise told. But I think it's hard for people to give honest feedback. Even if you ask them directly, they're going to say nice things. Sometimes I ask a client to tell me what was said at the water cooler, like after a course or a consulting gig. I find that I get more honest feedback that way, because people don't want to say it directly quite often if it's, a little bit negative. You also mentioned the idea of a retrospective, mini retrospective in your case, as a form of feedback. And I think that works really well when you're talking about how to improve your process. But one of the things I think people forget, and I've seen teams do it, is to make the comments about the thing, like you gave a good example of it, or the behavior, and not about the people. Sometimes the simplest thing to make yourself change your own behavior is to avoid words like, Lisa, you did this, or, maybe they, whoever they are, did that. And I think that can make a difference as well. So I try to use phrases like, I observed, and then that leads into behavior, right? And it can also take the sting out of a response, right? And it removes the blame. Because as soon as people say, you did this, it becomes personal. And and then we react, and it's hard to control that response. So even the simplest form of feedback, I think, like finding a bug and reporting it, it needs thought. So, when we give feedback without thinking about how it'll be received, I think that it requires thought. Even timing is important. For example, when I give give a talk, I often ask somebody for feedback. I think I've even asked you to do that for me once in a while. But I don't want it immediately, because I need time to come down. My adrenaline is still pumping really fast. And I want to be able to process it, especially if it's constructive, right? The feedback that's meant to be helpful. Now, if it's negative feedback after a talk like that, I can't process it, and all it is hurtful, right? So have you ever had any informal feedback from a colleague or a friend that's meant to be helpful but isn't?
Actually, when you were talking about getting feedback right after a talk, it made me remember a time I was doing a workshop, pairing with someone else on a workshop. And after the workshop, a friend of mine came up and said, Lisa, do you want some feedback? And, we had just finished, and I had screwed up a lot in the workshop because of the way I really depend on being able to look at my notes on the slides, and the way our room was set up and our laptop was set up, I couldn't really see my notes. And so I was really screwing up big time. It was a workshop. It wasn't, so my pair really made up for everything. So this friend said, Lisa, could I give you some feedback? And I said, sure. And she said, it would have been better if she had just given the workshop by herself.
Oh my God.
And it didn't hurt me because I know this person, and I know she doesn't mean it as a personal criticism, and she's just somebody without a filter. But yeah, that was kind of a funny one, but it's an example of probably how not to give people feedback.
Yes.
And in my professional career, I've received feedback that a lot of women I know have also received of, oh, you're too loud, Lisa, you're too aggressive, you're too emotional, and things that would in a woman are criticized, but in a man there would be passion and assertiveness and but I don't think there's any intention to be helpful. and I've received feedback that was clearly meant to put me in my place, like, oh, our team had working agreements that we're supposed to follow, and I bring up in a meeting, well, this developer, or I talk to the developer, that you didn't follow these, we have these agreements and you didn't follow them, and I'm told, Lisa, that's not your place to do that, and because that they perceive the developer as more valuable than a tester, which is a sign of a toxic culture. And if you start getting feedback like that, see what other choices you might have. But I've had really positive experiences. When I worked at Pivotal, they got rid of the annual reviews because that's a really slow feedback loop. So they instead, we had weekly one-on-ones with our managers, and they had a system to get an application where we could get continual peer feedback, either directly to peers and copy their managers, or just to the managers if it's something we were not comfortable telling our teammates. And they actually came and gave us training. Here's how to give timely, kind, specific feedback, and using techniques you were talking about, like I observed this, not like, whoa, you did this. And it really worked well. People were comfortable doing it. And when it was time, of course, we had to have salary reviews. So the managers could just look at the app and see what kind of feedback did these people get. And then they could ask teammates to give feedback about, each other. And a lot of times we use a retro type of format, which do stop, start, continue. So I think that's a nicer way to focus on how could you improve, and here's what you did well, rather than, let me criticize you. So I think that worked really well.
Right. No, that's, and I think you just put a really important point there too, is training. We assume that people know how to give feedback. We assume that people know how to receive feedback, and neither of those is true. Neither of those are true, and everybody is a little bit different. So I think we need to be cognizant of the type of feedback we're giving. I think people are generally pretty good if they're giving appreciation for good work. That's pretty easy. Or maybe if they're coaching, trying to help somebody expand their knowledge, those people usually have had training and they're pretty good at it. But maybe we are not, as people in general, so good at evaluating on the fly. So some general feedback, like you mentioned earlier, may not be helpful because it's not well thought out. They just, no filter, they just say what they think. And I think people also tend to evaluate based on their own standards, right? Their own motivation, their own expectations, without really understanding the context. Where are people coming from? It's really hard. So I think that for feedback to be impactful, to have the impact you would like, it has to be heard, right? And if you're assuming motivation or you're assigning blame, Lisa, be less assertive, don't talk so much, whatever it is, it's not going to be heard. And all that person hears is the negative connotation. And that is what you take with you. Right?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't help. So we really, like you say, we really need to be cognizant of what we're saying and how we're saying it. Don't make the feedback about yourself. Make it about helping the other person, and be conscious of the timing. Ask the person, is now a good time? Would you like some feedback? Is this a good time to do it?
Yes.
You really, like you say, you got to know your audience, know your context. But most of all, something I work on all the time, not always successfully, is listen. So that you can often help people more just by listening to them than by telling them things. Especially if you're trying to influence somebody. Listen, ask questions. Why did you do that? Why do you think that? Help them think it through, and they may come to a different conclusion that's more in line with what you think they might have should have done. So that's why I'm always trying to work on my listening skills.
Yes, listening is so important, but sometimes really hard to do. So let's wrap this up. Please feel free to contact us. Our email address is on here, our Twitter ID.
I don't see your screen.
You don't see. Okay, let me finish sharing the screen.
There it goes.
There we go. I actually have to hit share.
Yes. Technology.
Technology. But please feel free to contact us. We're pretty easy. I hope you enjoyed this episode of our Donkeys and Dragons. And we will see you next month. Don't forget to check out our blog posts as well on Agile Testing Fellow, and see you next month. Bye-bye.